Hello, everybody, and welcome to another of our Inside Coach Masterclass conversations. Absolutely delighted today to be joined for our Christmas special for Mr. John O'Sullivan. John is a dear friend and mentor of many of us at Beyond Pulse, and is somebody who is, in our opinion, one of the founding fathers of this drive for culture change in our industry, along with that of other sports. John, we're going to obviously talk a little bit today about your new book, but for the perspective of the listeners, John is also the founder of Changing the Game and Changing the Game project. He also is the host of the Way of Champions podcast and the Way of Champions conference that many of you may have visited in the past. John is a USSF A license and National Youth license coach, a former coach at the University of Vermont, and is somebody who I believe, Johnny O, is active with U12 boys right now, U13 boys?
Well, U13s, yeah.
U13 boys. So John, if I've missed something that you would like to share to just provide a little bit of extra insight, please feel free to enlighten the listeners. But if not, everybody, I assure you we're in for a treat. And again, I'm delighted to be able to welcome Mr. John O'Sullivan.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you so much, and for the great work that you guys do. It's an honor to be on. I think you touched on most of the stuff, but yeah, for the listeners who don't know me, I am a soccer guy by background. That's the sport that I coach still through to this day. But most of our work these days is probably 40% in the soccer world and 60% outside of it. So I am getting ready to get on an airplane and go to Italy to work with the International Ski Federation. I just got back from working with Rugby League in Australia. So we work across many, many sports, because the idea of needing to better educate our coaches, or how to educate parents and engage with them, how to create better sporting organizations. It's not a soccer problem, and it's not an American problem. And so, right. So we're pretty busy.
Yes, you are. And as I briefly referenced, John, we're going to speak today about, or largely about, the chapter or the title of your new book called Every Moment Matters. And I think it's so profoundly apt that you've been able to find a title that really encapsulates the essence of a lot of the work that you've been doing in this space for a while, and then for the rest of us, that emphasizes the importance of the relationships that we get to build and the conversations that we get to have, or maybe wish that we hadn't had sometimes with the athletes in our care. So if you're ready, let's delve in.
Yeah.
So Johnny,
well, let me interrupt and give my brother a shout out, because he's the one who helped me come up with the title. We were sitting on Long Island one day at my parents' house, and I was still working on the book and throwing around a lot of titles, of which I was all lukewarm about. And he was like, "Well, what are you trying to get across in this book?" And so I kind of explained everything, that, how important our influence is, and our influence is never neutral. And that's how I always sign off my podcasts. And
I was going to say, and that's a question that I've got. So we'll come back to that one.
We'll come back to that one then. But anyway, so I described all this to him, and he said, "So what you're trying to say is every moment matters?" And I said, "Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's the title right there." So my brother Desmond O'Sullivan, kudos to you.
There you go. A little profit share as well, I'm sure, or maybe more generous gift from Santa. So Johnny, I'm going to do this. I'm going to throw some questions at you. We'll take the conversation wherever it leads us, and obviously delve right into anything that we get interested in kind of learning a little bit more about. So, but I'm going to start with this, John. In a lot of the work that you perform, you challenge your audience to understand their why. What is it that drives them? Why is it that they do what they do? It's the first chapter, or the first lesson in your new book as well. So my question to you is, what is your why? And what is your why behind stepping away from being a full-time coach, which we addressed you were at the collegiate level, to performing the work that you now do across all of your platforms as a coach educator?
Yeah, so it's a great question. One of the sort of working subtitles of the book was kind of everything that you should learn in coaching education and you don't. And so I divided the book up into 4 parts. Why do I coach? how do I coach? What does it feel like to be coached by me? And how do I define success or redefining success? And I really think that um, I put why do I coach as sort of the first section in the first chapters because self-awareness is key to leadership. And if you are not self-aware, you can't be the best version of yourself. The great coach educator Joe Ehrman says to be a better coach, you have to be a better you. And how can you be a better you if you don't understand, if you haven't done the work? And so I just think this is the critical step for coaching. And it was funny. I was talking the other day to Landon Donovan and Kerry Taylor, who are going down this coaching pathway with SD Loyal, and this sort of same question came up to them. And Landon talked about, how can you lead? How can you do anything if you don't do the work on yourself?
Right.
And so I think many of the great coaches in this book talk about this as the foundation. And so for me, I think your why evolves over a long time. And certainly when I was younger and before I had my own children, my why would have been around to get ahead, to get the next job, to get a better job, to get recognition, all this
Right.
sort of stuff. And now I've been doing this long enough and found my happy place in where I live and the age that I coach, where it's really about taking my passion for the sport and instilling that in the kids who play so that they have both a lifelong love of soccer and a lifelong love of activity, and using sport to really teach character as well, because sports skills become life skills. And I think when you ask about my transition, I mean, really, I stopped coaching in 2011 because I was burnt out. And I was burnt out because of the politics and everything else I was doing. And I had lost sight of the coaching piece. And so I think one of the great lessons is, as a coach, burnout really happens, I really think, when you get too far away from your why, right? And your coaching job and your coaching lifestyle takes you away from why do I coach? And so that's when I first quit and been back at it now 3+ years, and I've never had more fun coaching. I think I'm a better coach now than I used to be, for sure. And my kids who I coach now get to be either the recipients of some of my best coaching and also some of my worst experimentation. So
Right.
it's a double-edged sword.
It is, but it's a fantastically candid insight, and it's one where I think you reference burnout there as being something that is a fear factor of obviously not just the players that we work with and a lot of the work that you do to support coaches to avoid that being one of the things that we witness, but also obviously the coaches themselves. So you referenced very briefly the insight into your purpose statement, which you link quite nicely to your why. Could you explain what that is, and perhaps if coaches are in a position where they're struggling with some of, whether it's issues with parents, or whether it's issues within their club or career progression or simply balancing time, could you enlighten people as to what their purpose statement might help them do in times of trouble, or if they are feeling similar things to what led you to kind of stop?
Yeah, and first of all, I think if you're in coaching, especially at a higher level, whether it's university or professional level, congratulations, you just joined a profession where you're guaranteed to get fired, right? And so so you better
Pop
have
the
a really
champagne now.
strong purpose and strong why, if you know that you just signed up for a job that you're going to get fired from eventually, probably, right? Especially at the top level.
Right.
And so, but even at the youth level, things come and go, teams come and go, club directors come and go, and if you're not really around, in touch with your purpose, then again, all the little stuff that happens around you can be really distracting. And let's face it, in the real world, many of us want to coach a certain way philosophically,
Hmm.
evidence based, based on things that I write about in my book or that you could learn on the podcast. And, I am always talking to the best sports scientists and psychologists and practice designers and skill acquisition people. And so when I design a practice, there's a lot of thought that goes into that. It's not
Right.
how I designed practices 25 years ago. And we all sometimes can work in places where the people that we work with, or maybe our club, doesn't necessarily align with our values. And that's where it's really important to know what you stand for, because sometimes maybe you have this opportunity to create your own little kingdom, right?
Right.
So we will do things a certain way with my group that maybe the rest of the club doesn't do, but this is the way we do it because this is what I believe. And then also to know, if you're not allowed to create your own kingdom and the organization you work for is the antithesis of what you believe, then you can't give up your why to stay there. That's when you got to start looking for a different place to coach.
Yeah, and it's so important, right, to guiding the decisions and the actions and the behaviors that we see on a daily basis. And I really like, John, that, again, you referenced there some of the insights that you do get to share, and that's kind of where I'm going to go with the next question. But I really like that you're finding a way of providing such insight for people so they can better understand and maybe, better help them decide what do I like, what does matter to me, what do I stand for, and ultimately how I get there is because I've now been exposed to information that I previously would never have, I've never have found out about. So I guess from everybody, thank you for obviously the work that you're doing to kind of make that more attainable than it's ever been. Johnny, you said that, a lot of your conversations are from, world-class experts, and obviously that maybe there was another title, a secondary title to your book that you could have ran with. I had down here to ask, it does feel like almost a one-stop shop for coaching and a one-stop shop for coaching insight that maybe people have never been afforded the luxury of understanding through, formal education pathways that are teaching us, what is necessary to deliver a session in way X, but not necessarily how to deal with my players or how to build a culture or any of the intricacies that just simply go into managing a team and people. Mm-hmm. While this is undoubtedly tough, if you had to pick just 3 pieces of information or calls to action to help anybody listening that would allow them to improve their coaching and their experience for themselves and their players based on some of those conversations, based on any of the experiences that you had, what would they be, and who was it that shared them with you?
That's a great question. That'll take up the rest of the hour here, I think. All right. Okay. Number one,
yeah,
from a how does it feel to be coached by me standard or section, intentionally build culture, right? Culture shapes the environment. Culture is your environment. Culture shapes behaviors. And what we're really doing, especially as youth coaches and high school and college coaches, we're developmental coaches, we're shaping behaviors, right? And so culture teaches your athletes, this is how we do things around here. People like us do things like this, right? And so I think so many coaches, and certainly I did as a young coach, leave this to chance, right? They leave culture to chance. They hope that they end up with a great culture and great teammates that support each other and athletes who are accountable and show up on time and work hard and all these sort of things. But those are behaviors that we can shape every single day as coaches. And so when coaches say, oh, I don't have time to come up with core values, or I don't have time to do this, my answer is you don't have time not to. This is the essence of what you do. This is what tells people, I want to sign up for that because this is what it feels like when I show up here. So I think that's number one, is intentionally build culture. And obviously that's a big part of the book, from all of part 3, and how do you come up with these core values, and how do you have standards and not rules, and how do you make it competitive and create this daily competitive environment. So that would be a huge part of it. Number two, play the game. Right? The kids didn't sign up to stand in line. No kid ever is like, God, I hope we stand in line today. So teach through the game. And assuming that most people on this are coaching football, coaching soccer, um, if you're working with 12 and unders, play, practice, play is the best model. 100%. I've been doing that for 15, 18 years now. Even when US soccer said don't do that, thankfully now they are saying do that, but it just works. It just works so well. And then even as kids get older, still, I mean, look at it, go to a professional practice. They still show up and play rondos and stuff.
Right.
People can control their body. They know how hard they can go. And then, you're playing your rondos and you're doing your game-based stuff early on, and you're mixing in your movement and your core stability and your proprioception and your dual force type stuff. But in that first 25 minutes of practice, while you're quote warming up, you're still getting touches, you're still getting decisions, you're still getting interactions. And then just make your practice look like the game. Don't teach technique, develop skill. All right, I have a whole chapter in there.
Yeah.
A lot of people in soccer love to teach technique, and they think that if they teach enough technique, you can just pluck it and drop it in the game, right? But technique is
clarify
yeah. Go
what
ahead.
you mean, what the difference. Just clarify the difference for anybody who's maybe less familiar.
Sure. Yeah, so technique would be the definition I use in the book is the ability to perform a task, and skill is the ability to deploy it in the environment, right? And that's what I would differentiate the two. And so if all you're doing is teaching people to do the task, and in this highly dynamic game of soccer where you never play the same pass twice, or if you're doing if you're doing attacking dribbling, why would you dribble around a cone? Because absent from that cone is everything that determines whether you'll dribble in the game, which is your space from the defender and how fast you're moving and how fast they're backing up and where's their cover and where's your support and where are you on the field and what time of game it is. And all these sort of things are absent from that one versus cone interaction. And so, sure, a kid who goes home, one versus cone is awesome, right? But don't gather in groups to play by yourself. That to me makes no sense. We don't get enough practice time to do that. And
No, I agree.
These
Okay.
massed practice. Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I cut you
That's
off. I was going to say, so we've got number one in terms of the emphasis of culture, and number two on the importance of coaches playing the game or coaching through games. So number three would be
joy.
Yes,
it's supposed to be fun. It's a game. Even if you're a professional, it still should be about joy. I love some of my favorite team development work is with Division III college teams, because those coaches know that joy is the key, because there's no scholarships. There's nothing keeping the kid there. Unless this is fun, unless this is joy, unless I love my team, why would I play? Right? It's not like Division I where there's a scholarship or something. So, when we talk to Steve Kerr, that's the number one core value of the Golden State Warriors is joy. So if they can be about joy, if Pete Carroll and the Seahawks can be about joy, then I think your 12-year-olds can be about joy too.
Right. And again, so you've obviously referenced two guys that we'll touch upon momentarily, but in our game or in the soccer game, you also share an anecdote from a visit to Manchester United, and fun or joy being a prominent focus of their sessions too. So for the soccer coaches in the room, obviously there's the prominence of that is still highly evident, right? It's still right there for everybody to see. That.
I was talking to Mark the other day, to Willow the other day actually, about this when I was there, and I was at the Cliff, which is now just where I think the 8, 9s and 10s train. And I just remember, I mean, this kind of ties these two things together. The 8-year-olds were finishing up, let's say it was 6:30, and the next group was starting at 7. But at 6:30, when the other group was finishing up, it honestly looked like the New York subway. All the kids from the next group, like their faces are planted against the door, and as soon as they were allowed in, they ran in and they got a game going. So they played for 30 minutes, and then it bled into the beginning of their quote training session, just playing, just loving the game, right? And so I think this is the type of thing great environments create love of the game. They leave space for creativity and self-organization and decision making and all these sort of things that
And who wouldn't
you
want
know.
that, right? I'm not sure many coaches or parents listening would say that's a terrible idea. All of that sounds awful.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Tom. I mean, if what are the characteristics? What are the back to the behaviors that we want in our older players? I just listed them, right? We want people who can make decisions. We want people who can organize and switch things on the fly.
Right,
We want intelligence on the field. We want all these things. We want resilience. We want creativity. Well, if these are the things that we want in our future player, they have to be part of our sessions now,
right,
right? When we're working with those 8-year-olds, and we're working with those 10-year-olds, and we're working with those 12-year-olds. And if we coach those things out of them by making every decision for them, or getting upset at them when they decided to try to rainbow the guy.
right.
Yeah, I have a kid that I coach now, and I took him at tryouts because he tried to rainbow someone in tryouts. I'm like, fair enough. Like, someone who has that kind of courage, I'll do it. Now, over the course
Right.
of the year, I had to say to him a couple times, the rainbow is not always on. Right? That might not be the best decision in that moment, but I'd much rather have the kid who has the courage to do that and the ability to do that, that I can say, look around, what are the numbers? Is this the best situation, or do you
Right.
do something else? Then try to convince a kid who's afraid to do that because it's been coached out of him that it's okay to, try to take this guy on here.
Right. No, it's brilliant, and it links, for me, it links nicely to something that I personally stole from one of the Way of Champions podcasts, and blends kind of two questions that I have for you together. One is, as we've referenced, your primary sport was and still is soccer, but a lot of the experts and world leaders that you have on your shows and that you've interviewed over the years, have been from other sports. So it's a very multidisciplinary approach towards rounding off your own education and obviously raising awareness for others. So why is that so important to you, and why do you feel so strongly about encouraging other coaches to feel the same way? And then B, how has that impacted your own coaching performance, specific to anything that you've seen or come across from a sport outside of ours?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, first of all, sometimes when we've been involved in a sport for so long, it's like you're in a hole, and as you're looking for more things, you're just digging deeper and deeper and deeper down that hole, instead
Yeah,
of, pick your head up and what do you see, right? What do you see outside the hole, which is all these other sports that we can learn from. And so, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying don't learn more, don't go observe, don't, stop going in and observing top coaches running practices and stuff like that, because it's great. I mean, I was in Spain last year, and I had an amazing week there, just watching training sessions it was the winter break for Germany and all that. And so Dortmund was there and Feyenoord was there. And I'm just watching all these training sessions sitting on the field. It was wonderful.
it's lucky to
But in
be
the
you.
what's that?
It's lucky to be you.
Lucky to be me. Yeah. But well, what was really cool is that I've been coaching long enough now that if I never added another activity to what I do, I would probably be okay. Right?
Yeah,
I started coaching when we used to put it in binders, and up here on my shelf, there's like 7 binders of stuff, right? And they're all this thick. I have enough practices that if I actually went back through that and go, oh yeah, I haven't done that one in like 7 years. That one was pretty good. So we want to learn that, but I think that's the technical part of it. But coaching, which is communication and inspiration, motivation, caring, leadership, team building, that's coaching. And that's where we can really learn from other sports. Do you tell me that you couldn't sit down with a master coach like Brad Stevens or Steve Kerr or Mike Krzyzewski in basketball, or a Pete Carroll or a Bill Belichick in football, in American football, right? Or a lacrosse coach or a volleyball coach, that you couldn't sit there and learn from them. I mean, I just was working at the Olympic Training Center. And I watched the women's wrestling team coach run a session. I
Hmm.
wrestled growing up, but I don't coach wrestling. My kids don't wrestle. I have nothing to do with wrestling now. But man, it was like a master coaching session, a master coaching session. And so sometimes when we get outside of our sport and we sit around a table, and you're the soccer guy and I'm the volleyball guy and there's the lacrosse person, there's the ice hockey person, now all the sports specific ego is out of the room and we can really talk about coaching. And this is,
Right.
I think, a super important part of our development.
And I guess what I should have referenced is it's an idea from, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Steve Kerr podcast, where he talked about the when he took his first job, how is he going to coach? Not the
Yeah.
what sessions are you going to run, not the what activities will you use, not will you be games based or drill based, nothing like that. It was create 4 things that matter to you, and I've taken that and I've used it in soccer. It's helped me clarify kind of my own my understanding of what the kind of inherent things that I would look for or hope to see in a practice that I delivered, and subsequently obviously the club now, saying that these things are important to us, but without a conversation, or listening to you have a conversation, should I say, with somebody totally removed from it being on a soccer field with soccer players, never would have I thought about that.
Right.
So I do just think some of the value in some of the concepts that you share, and just the notion of exploring more and exploring deeper and learning from people that obviously may share your challenges just with a different shaped ball, can often be so powerful yet
Yeah.
overlooked.
Yeah. And,
Um,
I think like another story I share in the book is just that I've incorporated from another sport. Karch Karai, who's the women's national volleyball team coach, he concludes every player meeting with the following question: how can I be a
yeah,
better coach for you?
yeah,
Right? How can I coach you better? I mean, what a powerful question. And when you start asking your athletes that, first of all, if they're a little older, they're stunned because no one's ever asked them that before.
right,
It's always about, well, if you're not learning, it must be you have to change. And now your coach is saying, how can I coach you better? And when you get players to open up and say, I really love when you pull me aside and teach me, or hey, I know you're being hard on me, and sometimes I get my head down, but keep doing it because actually I appreciate that. And so asking your players that is kind of crazy. I just finished player evaluations with all my 12-year-olds, and that was it. That was one of the things. I had them do a self-evaluation first, and the last question on it was, how can we be better coaches for you? The best answer was, one kid wrote, you guys are pretty good.
yeah. You're all right. I
You
like
guys
it.
are
I'll
all
keep it
right.
around.
You don't need to do anything different. But
No,
but some of them
that's
were just said, you know, please pull me aside instead of talking to me in front of the group.
right,
Okay, fair enough.
right. No, and it's for anybody listening to whom that's the first time they've heard it, I think it will resonate quite how astonishingly simple that concept is, but ultimately how impactful it could be. And something that obviously, again, many of us may have stolen from you previously, but for those to whom it's new, go try it, because it's such a wonderfully rewarding opportunity. I guess it's an opportunity to have a wonderfully rewarding conversation with people that you're obviously responsible for caring about. So
Hmm.
um, I guess we're 20 minutes into a conversation, and for anybody to whom you are new to, we'll be starting to learn just why we were so excited to, or why I was so excited to be able to host you today. I want to talk a little bit more about a lot of what you discuss, which is coaches moving away from just simply the X's and O's of understanding the technical aspects to more, how the players learn, how a team culture has grown, how do coaches continue to better themselves. And this is a statistic that you shared in the book again about maybe only 1 in 5 coaches ever receiving formal information and insight or education into understanding player motivation, understanding how their behaviors can impact the players that they work with. So delve in or give me a synopsis answer for why is it so important that coaches move away just from the X's and O's, and understand all the rest of it that goes into to being a highly effective and impactful coach of young players.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, the statistics that you're referring to are really important. The statistic that goes along with that is 96% of kids who play for a trained coach come back the next year, and about 74% who play for an untrained coach come back the next year. So 5 times as many kids drop out when their coach isn't trained. And I think that is a really shocking statistic. And then number 2, even when coaches are trained, very few of them are trained beyond here's some activities to run, here's how to lay out your cones, and yet being trained in motivation and communication and understanding who's in front of you is key to that, is key to, again, player retention. I think the best coaching course that I took back in my days of full-time coaching was the National Youth License. It was brilliant because it was the first course that said, who's in front of you? What is the physical, psychosocial, emotional needs of a 6-year-old, of an 8-year-old, of a 10-year-old, of a 12-year-old? And now we understand what those are. This is why it's tied to these are the type of activities that work, right? You don't name a team captain for your 7-year-old team. It doesn't make any sense. They're so egocentric, right? And so kudos to U.S. Soccer. They've done so much. Their revamp of the licensing is far better than it was before. It's much better. It's a great educational thing now. I'm sad the U.S. youth license went away. I don't know that they've effectively replaced that at this point.
Yeah, I think the United Soccer Coaches are running a variation of it.
A variation of it. Yeah, which is great. But I really think that should be part of a great opportunity for people to, I used it as continuing ed to renew my A license. It used to count as that. And it was just a wonderful course. And so I think this is where coaches, you have to kind of go outside sometimes the traditional just getting your license side of things in order to get some of this information. And part of the reason that I wrote Every Moment Matters was because I think it has a lot of this information and the research links and the evidence of what is the needs of the person, who's in front of me in this moment, how do people learn rather than how do I teach, but how do people learn? What are effective learning strategies? What are effective practice design strategies? I think all these things, when you design a coaching course, you only have so many hours. And so what goes into it is a really hard decision. And so I felt like I could write a book that contained a lot of stuff that if we had unlimited hours, this would all be in there, but it's really not.
But I think you nicely emphasized and the importance of intentionality in that conversation, right? Because if I understand what my learners' needs are, I can be intentional not only with the content of the activities that I put in front of them, but with how I choose to introduce a topic or to coach or to teach or to let them fail. It means that depth of understanding heightens my ability to be as effective as possible, ultimately, because I understand what they need. And just again, if to link it back to soccer momentarily, can you share the insight from Chris van der Hagen and the information that you reference with how the Belgian FA, so one of the world's now prominent powerhouses, kind of used that concept to shift what they chose to do?
Yeah, so Chris is the director of coach education for Belgium. I believe that's his current title. He's also an assistant scout for the men's national team, head coach of the U19 women's, works with their senior team as well. So high level coach. And talk about another amazing trip that I got to do. Him and I spoke at a conference together 2.5 years ago or so in Switzerland. And then we had a mutual friend took us to Chamonix skiing for the weekend. So not only did I get to hang out with Chris, but we got to kind of spend a weekend up in Chamonix and lots of long dinners and bottles of red wine and
Johnny, you're going
lots
to
of
make people fall out with
fondue.
you. They're gonna turn off through jealousy.
But just amazing conversations with Chris, who's just great. And I just visited him again this summer, and he's just this amazing guy and such a generous, caring guy who he doesn't care that you're not Belgian, right? He just loves to see kids. He's really involved with this organization called I Coach Kids, which has put out these amazing series of videos. But basically,
and they're
Belgium,
free, right?
and they're free, totally free.
Yeah,
just look
go get them.
Yeah, they're totally free and they're really, really good. They're all up there now. I think there's 3 or 4 different levels of modules now, but fantastic stuff. And so the whole Belgium revamp came after when they co-hosted the Euros with the Netherlands, and they didn't even get out of their group, and they said, why can't we beat Turkey? And what they realized was that the game was all about the adults, and they needed to really say, well, who's in front of us and what do they need? And so they totally revamped coach education, but they revamped game formats as well. So they went to dribbling soccer for 5 and 6-year-olds. So they play 2v2, and they play short little games, and it's sort of a ladder, right? And so if we win, we move up. If we lose, we move down. You're constantly playing a different opponent. You have goals. You can score lots of goals. They play 8-a-side until 14. They let kids play down if they get a note from the doctor saying that they're developmentally behind. They play quarters, not halves, and they have a rule that there's no substitutions during the quarter unless a player is injured. But if a kid's sitting on the bench in the first quarter, he has to play the next quarter. So now they've basically taken out of coaches' hands playing time, because you have to get kids in half the game, if not more. So they've created these child-centric rules and regulations around the sport, and lo and behold, 15 years later, they're number 1 in the World Cup semifinalist. Just a top team producing top players, and it's just a great model of what can happen when you make it about who's in front of me.
And I think a wonderfully humbling message to many of us as club directors and technical leads in clubs that are looking for answers to questions that we often overcomplicate.
Yeah.
Just strip it back, right? And I think that's
and we look at something like 2v2 soccer and we say that's not soccer, right? That's not the game. But it's the game for a 5-year-old. It's the game for a 6-year-old, which is I'm going to dribble. Like, I don't pass when I'm 6, right? And if we put more kids on there, what do we have? We have a big giant blob on the field, right? And then we everyone's yelling at them to spread out, because spread out means a lot to an adult. It means nothing to a 6-year-old. So they've taken away the blob and said just dribble past people and shoot lots. And if you win, you move up, and if you lose, you move down, and you'll always be ended up playing against opponents who are your level by the end of that day or the end of that match time, and you'll have scored lots of goals and had lots of great interactions. And it just makes sense, and the kids will love it. It's usually the adults who don't like it.
Right. That's a problem a lot of the time, isn't it? That it's a game, it's not the adult game played by children, which is often what people assume it to be. It's a at the various age groups, it's a child's game played by children, and the two are very different. I want to flip now into what my interpretation is of a humbling experience that you had, that you shared at the start of the book, which is about the impact of your words, and a number of years after uttering them, it becoming aware of the impact of them. And you talk about a rule of 1, and our Mr. Mark Wilson also you interviewed, and the power of Sir Alex Ferguson's words to him when he was at Manchester United. Um, can you elaborate a little bit more on, you know, what that means to you and to the coaches, and how they might become a little more aware of what it is they're saying, and how they're saying it, and perhaps when they're saying it?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, the whole idea of every moment matters as a title is you never know when something that you say or do is going to stick with a kid the rest of their life, right? We work with children, it's public, emotional, we keep score, and yet today might be the day that they remember. Today might be the day that they learn. And so being intentional about those things is so, so critical. And so the rule of one is a little saying that Jerry Lynch and I use, the idea of like one person, one comment, one time. We can change a life forever. And so you never know when that is. And Mark's, Mark's story. Do you want me to share Mark's story from the book, or is he? I'm sure he's shared it on this podcast, on
He
your
has,
thing.
but no, you can, yeah, just again share it so the
I mean,
conversation is further.
yeah,
Sure.
I used his story because it's so powerful, and I asked him what was one of the defining moments of his life as a young footballer, and he said, when they were at the Cliff and their job was to clean the boots and clean the locker rooms and clean the toilets and showers as a trainee. He said once a week, Alex Ferguson would come down and you'd hear him because he'd carry this little cricket bat and he'd bang it along the banisters. He came down and he said, "Come with me," and he'd drag you into the toilets or whatever, and he'd go around, he'd run his hand over every little thing and reach behind the toilet, and if it was dirty, he said, "If I can't trust you to clean this, how could I ever trust you to play in front of 70,000 people?" And this was something that Mark said stuck with him forever.
Forever.
That's a rule of one moment
Right.
right there. And I think every single person listening to this, you've had that moment. It might be from a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a coach. We've all had rule of one moments. And because you have had them, your kids will as well. And you are in a very unique position to be someone who delivers those things. So this doesn't mean give false praise. This doesn't mean not to be authentic, but it just means recognize that something that you say or do could be sticky.
Right.
And it's, again, your influence is not neutral. It's either
Right.
going to be positive or negative, and you don't get to pick and choose what they remember. So you have to be very careful in your critiques and very aware. In certain moments, this is a moment that's going to stick. And these are moments, right, of great pride, great connection, great insight. These are the sticky moments. And so you must just be ready and sometimes catch yourself. Right? If after games that my team loses, I get really, really bad, I get really angry all the time, then you have to say maybe it's not the time to have that conversation, right? Let's
Right.
do it in the hotel. Let's do it before the next practice, things like that. So
Right.
I think this is what's really critical.
And I'm conscious of time, Johnny, and I'm going to ask two more questions.
I'm good to go here.
You
I
are?
just got to ship some books. That's all.
Um, okay. Well, with that said, then, so you referenced there the sticky moments. Now, many coaches want more than just their words to stick. They want the practices that they design and the content of them to stick as well. I thought it was a really fascinating insight that you offer in the book about some of the teaching methodology that is underpinned by true learning theory and activities or concepts that are theoretically sound. Could you share a little bit of light into what they may be, so that more than just words get to stick?
Yeah, great question. So you turn on, go to Facebook, you go any sort of thing, and you'll see all these learning hacks, right? Right, learn Spanish in a week, right? Like that ever happens. And so there's all these things, but a couple of years ago, the U.S. Department of Education actually said, well, let's do a review of all the research and find what of these quote learning concepts or learning hacks or learning tricks are actually backed up by science, and there's four, and that's interleaving, spacing, quizzing, and desirable difficulties, right? And so I'll kind of talk about those. But I think the biggest one that we use that really creates most of these things is interleaving. And so the difference would be a massed practice and an interleave practice. A massed practice is that I repeat the same thing over and over and over and over and over, right? We're going to just pass this ball until we know how to pass. We're going to do scissors until we know how to do a scissor. But every subsequent action that we take in a massed practice, our brain shuts down a little bit. It channels. And I think anyone goes to the weight room and you do some difficult sort of lift with some balance in it. Your first one, you're like, whoa, and then by like 7, you're like, yeah, I got this, no problem, And so that's it. Your brain channels that. But it's really that first one when you're like, whoa, that's when you're wiring these pathways. And so what happens when we interleave our practice, when we do something and then do something else and come back to something, we're forcing our brain to consistently retrieve, how do we do that? How do we do that? And that makes learning robust. That makes learning sticky. When we mass our practice, our athletes will do it better in the short term. So if all we do is hit balls, strike balls with our laces for the next hour, we will be hitting balls with our laces better in that hour. But it's not sticky learning. And the idea of learning is not so I can do it now, it's so I can retrieve it in the game. And so what all the research says is that actually slow learning is sticky learning. And that initial thing that makes you feel good, like, oh yeah, we got this, is actually a very poor indicator of whether we'll be able to repeat it again later on. And so this is one of the challenges as we coach, is that parents love lines, parents love organization, parents love, all this great stuff. Oh, look at, we need this skill work. But actually, it's not, and some coaches love it too. It feeds our ego, like, wow, look how good we are today. But it's a really, really poor indicator of learning. Learning environments are ugly, they're messy, there's lots of mistakes, but those are the things that become robust. And so I tried to sort of outline in the book, what are these things, what are these components, and what are different activities we can do to make sure that they happen, because over the long term, our players will learn better.
Right. And it's so important to, I think sometimes maybe younger coaches are seeking that validation of it not being neat and tidy and orderly, maybe because there's a misinterpretation of what, as you eloquently described, learning should or shouldn't look like. But again, you nicely break down the types of activities and the complexity of the process that I think will be very reassuring. So, like you said, more info in the book for that one.
Yeah, it's a deep topic that I hope I made translatable and readable, and shared some stories with it. But again, if this is what I do, if I'm a coach, I really should understand how people learn.
For sure.
And that might be one of the most important things I'll know.
Right. And I also, it's an interesting, just on that, it's an interesting conversation about language as well and concepts. And I heard once that I should be unapologetic about expecting people who are responsible for educating others to understand learning theory and education, because if we're responsible for it, we need to understand it. So while it might sound scary, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? What is spacing, referencing? What does he mean by quizzing? Go and find it, go and learn, because ultimately it underpins all the actions that you should be producing.
Yeah, and my guess is that a lot of people listening to this are probably doing a lot of it already, and now we're just putting a terminology to it, right? We're putting a word to something that's maybe more scientific than like, oh yeah, I already do that, right? And I think a lot of times too, coaches are already doing things that then the research comes along and says, oh, this is effective, and true master coaches are like, I've been doing that for 20 years.
Right.
But I think true master coaches are always willing to say, well, what else do you have? Is there something else here? I'd
Right.
love, that to me makes sense, right? And so
Right.
they're always willing to layer on something new. I do a lot of work in the swimming world, and there's a big shift between just how many hours and how many miles you can swim in swimming, which is, had 10-year-olds doing 20 hours a week of practice, to now shorter, more intense interval type training that doesn't keep the kids in the pool twice a day, 6 days a week. And so again, these are the type of things that when evidence starts to show, hey, this is more effective, as coaches, we have to be ready to pivot.
Right. And nicely, it makes sense, right? When you actually hear about it and and you're enlightened by it, it's like, a little penny drop moment of, yeah, nicely that seems to work. Okay, this one, and I'm going to give you a second to think about it, because I'd like to close with this based on, again, for me at least, some of the really important things that I've taken and that I've had the pleasure of learning from you from a while, in terms of seeking out as many different ways to learn, and looking to learn from others, and just being respectful of continuing to want to evolve, to make sure that what we do can allow for the best possible education and experience for the young people in our care, and obviously to keep them in the game, which is where I like to think changing the game came from. Change those experiences for the better. So here's the question: if you had to pick a five-a-side all-star team of coaches with whom you've worked or learned from, right? Stick with me. A, who would they be? And B, what would the single characteristic that they possessed that you felt separated them from the rest be?
Great question. Oh, wow, what a great question. Okay, so I have to clarify your question and ask, what does learn from mean? Like, did I have to actually have a conversation with them?
No, I mean, no, not necessarily. People of influence, I guess, the single biggest influences,
Okay.
on your career, and if you could characterize why they were so special, but just in one word.
Okay. So my five-a-side team. So uh, I've never spoken to, but got to watch Pep Guardiola run training sessions, and he's unbelievable. So he would have to be on there. Plus, he's a pretty darn good player, so that'd be good.
But what character, like what
What
made him?
characteristic of him?
Yeah,
Connection. His ability
connection.
to individual connection, to talk at every break to every single, to players. Just his individual teaching within a team dynamic was absolutely incredible. I watched him coach with Bayern Munich, and it was off the charts. I couldn't believe, right? He didn't have any magic drills, right? No magic activities, but the way that he ran them and the way that he connected and coached within them was off the charts. So that would be number one. Number two, I think obviously Steve Kerr, just learning from him has been amazing. Watching him work the last couple of years. Jerry and him have known each other a long time, and so just he was fantastic. And I think the word that comes to mind with Steve is authentic. Right, he is himself. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's not apologetic for his flaws, which I think is good. And so yeah, he'll drop the F-bomb once in a while. He'll get a technical once in a while. But I think deep down he's a really, deep thinking human being, and it comes across in his coaching. Number three, without a doubt, one of the most influential coaching mentors I've had was Jerry Yeagley from Indiana University.
Yeah.
And if I could say the one thing about Jerry, it's not one word, but when Jerry, when you're talking to Jerry, he makes you feel like the most important person in the room, right? And when you feel like the most important person in the room, you'll run through a wall for a guy. You'll do anything for that person. And Jerry is one of those really special coaches that has that ability about him. All right, so that's three. So I got two more to go.
Got two more. Keep
Oh
digging, my man.
man, keep digging. Okay. Let me think here. Um, one of the coaches I've gotten to know over the last couple of years is Cindy Timschel, who's the lacrosse coach at the Naval Academy.
Okay.
And I don't know if she plays soccer, so I don't know if she'd go to my five-a-side team. But Cindy won 8 national championships at Maryland. She took the Naval Academy to the Final Four. And one of the things that I love about Cindy is she's always looking for the next thing. She's always evolving as a coach. She was one of the first coaches to use sports psychology. She was one of the first ones to look at team culture.
Thinking
she's
forward.
just forward thinking, right? She's never stuck. She's done in, whatever happened today, she's ready to move on to the next thing. And I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
So that would be number 4. And then I think because of my own world that I live in, having a daughter and a son, coaching boys, coaching girls, I've learned an absolute ton from Anson Dorrance from University of North Carolina. Just because, and the word I would use for him, maybe that inspired me when I first met Anson 15 years ago, was curiosity. Right? He always was looking for, like, again, sort of, what's next. And this was a very impactful moment for me that I wrote about in the book at my first or second coaching course, and it was the sports psychology lecture or something, and I was sitting in the back with my buddies, and we're all kicking our heels up, kind of, oh, well, what do we got from here? And then all of a sudden I looked, and who's sitting in the front row taking notes, asking questions? It's Anson. I'm like, wait, that guy's won 18 national titles.
Yeah.
He's won a World Cup, and he's asking questions and sitting in the front, and I'm sitting in the back, not taking notes. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe just, curiosity, but also just like a model of that, again, that great coaches are lifelong learners. So there's my 5.
And you know what? I love those
That was
answers.
a good question, by the way. That was a
That's
really
all
good
right.
question.
I tried with that one. No, Johnny, I love that, because everything you've referenced is controllable by the person, right? Us as a coach, that's not saying we have to, obviously a knowledge of the game that you're coaching is essential, but none of that is that, his or her tactics or their ability to demonstrate or whatever people might look at on a surface level and say you need to be competent in to be a coach. None of that is there. And this is it's nice for me, whether it was intentional or not for you, but it's so much around why I've taken so much value out of the work that you've performed over the years, and trying to encourage people to embrace all of these different ideas, because if we can be curious, if we can think forward, if we can understand the importance of connection with our players, if we can be authentic, because ultimately there's only one of us, right? And if we can be curious in terms of continuing to want to evolve and find new ways of making ourselves and our team better, then the game is going to be in a much better place. And ultimately all of what you now spend your life, working towards is achieving that, so that, the players in our care ultimately have a better time. So I think that's a really neat way to kind of wrap up, me delving into your world, and obviously the content of what is a fantastic book that I congratulate you on producing for us all, and strongly encourage anybody who is yet to read it to do so, especially over the festive period when they may have a little bit more time on their hands.
Yeah, and I promise all the coaches, right? Because all the first question I get when the book comes out from all my coaching friends is, when's the audiobook coming out? So
there you
that'll
go.
be sometime in
on my car rides.
That'll be sometime in 2020.
There you go. So you've heard it here, guys. Be patient.
Be patient.
And John, for anybody who, may not yet follow your work on a more broader scale, how can we find you? How can they find you? Social
Yeah.
media or the website? What,
Sure. So obviously the new books, Every Moment Matters, and Amazon is the best place to find that one for sure. If you want an
current
autograph
number
copy,
one.
what's that?
Just give yourself a little pat on the back. Current number one bestseller, I believe, right now.
Yeah, it's had a good launch and a good release in a couple sports coaching and sports psychology and stuff like that, which has been really cool. Um, uh, if you want an autograph copy, just come to my website, changingthegameproject.com. You'll figure out how to order it there. Um, and that's it. I mean, Changing the Game Project's the mothership where you can find the podcast, you can find our blog,
Yeah.
and then
And that's the
social
Way of
media.
Champions podcast. Just
Way
so
of Champions podcast is you'll see the link there in the main menu, and then what was I gonna say? Oh, social media. At CTG Project HQ is Twitter and Instagram, and just look for on Facebook. Just look for Change the Game Project. You'll find us.
There we go. Well, John, thank you from all of us at Beyond Pulse for your time and obviously all of the generosity of your insight and education and what you share with us on a regular basis. And I guess from everybody that, like me, is or was an aspiring coach that has turned to you for some guidance, whether in person or online. Thank you. Thank you so very much for all of what you're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tom, and to all you guys and at Beyond Pulse. You're doing amazing work as well. I'm glad that we've been able to know each other these last couple of years and have quite a few of these good conversations. And now we finally recorded one. So here we go.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Johnny, and happy holidays to you and yours.
Awesome. You too.